Hey Mini enthusiasts, how are you doing? Welcome back. I hope you're well and I hope you are having a great day. Today we're back on Project Tardis. I'm going to refit the cylinder head. We're going to put a new head gasket on. I'm going to set the tappets, torque the head down, and we're going to talk a little bit about thermostats. But before we get into that, I just wanted to say a big thank you and welcome to all the new subscribers that have joined the channel. Welcome along. There is a back catalogue of well over 400 videos now, and we've done quite a few projects, too many for me to name off the top of my head. So welcome along, and I'd done a bit of number crunching earlier, so if all the people were subscribed that watched my videos regularly, I would have over 20,000 subscribers, which would be just absolutely phenomenal. So if you are watching this video and you're not a subscriber, please do consider subscribing. It's free. It doesn't cost a penny. It's not pay-per-view. I'm not going to spam your inbox and things like that. And if you don't enjoy what's going on at the moment, there's new projects coming up all the time, so I'm sure you will enjoy that in the future. And the reason I want subscribers is because, quite honestly, the ad revenue you get for running a YouTube channel of this sort of size, 8,000 subscribers, is honestly, it's next to nothing. It's by no means a reflection of the amount of effort that goes into doing the work and filming the videos. In fact, I think a whole year's ad revenue is probably just about enough to pay for the equipment that this video is being filmed on. So, like I say, it costs nothing to be a subscriber and it helps grow my channel. So, you know, without you subscribers, there wouldn't be a channel. So please do consider subscribing. I would really, really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed this week's video and we'll be back again with more content. Thanks a lot. Right, the first thing we've done actually is rotate the engine so the pistons, all four of them, at the lowest point they can be. Obviously they can be lower, but you need to get them at the midpoint where they're all as low as they can be at the same time. Rags down the bores to try and stop any debris going down there. And now I will just, this is just WD-40. So it's just WD-40 on the rag and around the edge of the bore. And that means if any grit drops down there, it should stick to the rag. Now I'm not too worried about spilling a little bit of WD-40. In fact, that's what I want. Next bit, you need to make sure you've got something that is pretty much perfectly flat. So this is actually a rubbing down block for bodywork. So I know it's quite flat, some 240 wet and dry, and we're just going to give it a light sort of skim backwards and forwards, and you need to try and make sure you apply even pressure and do it the same amount over the whole head. But to be honest, it's cast iron, so you could sit there rubbing away for quite a long time before you rub away the block and make the block uneven. There we go, I'm happy with how that's cleaned off. Obviously, if you were running, I don't know, a 1380 turbo or something like that, then you would probably want to have the block machined flat. But a 998 automatic, not too worried. Now we're going to clean out the stud holes. Same with any gasket face, we want to make sure that it's oil and grease free, so just a wipe over with a bit of brake cleaner. Now let's get the studs in. So now we're going to fit the head studs, and I'm reusing the old ones. Now you don't have to replace them every time. They're not stretch bolts or stretch studs. But I think if you're running a performance engine, high compression, turbo, something like that, it is probably worth investing in a new set of head studs. And certainly if the car, you know, is maybe done a few more miles, but these head studs look absolutely fine. I've actually cleaned these off, make sure the threads are all nice and clean at both ends. And you can usually see actually if they've been over tightened, because when you look at the thread pitch profile, the kind of, it's hard to explain, but the cut part of the thread, when it's been over tightened, you can see where it's kind of leaned over. And if they look like that, just replace them, because they are probably about to snap. So nice and clean at both ends. We're not using any lubricant on these, and they should all go in the holes quite nicely. Very important to blow out those holes again, because you can actually hydraulic it. So if you've got oil where you've taken the head off and it's gone down the head stud hole, and then you screw the stud in, it doesn't go in all the way because there's dirt, debris, or maybe oil down there, and then you tighten that up with a torque wrench, you're putting a lot of hydraulic pressure. Now what you can do, if you've got tap and die set, is if they are dirty and they want cleaning out, just run a tap up and down the thread just to clean it. But I think mine are all going to be okay. So I just dry fit them, and I fit them by hand. I very much listen to what Paul Hickey says about taking things apart and feeling them. Certainly, like with installing the head studs and that, it's quite nice to feel like what they go in like. Obviously, if you start to feel any resistance or something like that, you might want to take them out and clean up the thread hole. But these, as I say, by hand. If you've got to use the 2-nut method to wind them in, there's something wrong. And I've always just done these hand tight, all the way down to the bottom. Make sure they've gone all the way home, and then hand tight. So that is beautiful. They've all gone down nicely. Just double check. Right, we are ready for the head gasket. Right, so the head gasket we're using is a Victor Rines head gasket, which is a really, really good gasket for a 998. I think I've mentioned before in previous videos, it's not like the copper head gasket, it's a composite gasket, which is obviously, you know, in sort of gasket material is more modern than copper. And because it's composite like that, again, it is really important to make sure your mating surfaces are perfectly clean. So just before I go on with that, I'm just going to give it a quick blow. And then it's really important to make sure you get the gasket the right way up, because it can go both way round on a Mini. It can be quite easy to get it wrong, actually. Now, some gaskets, or most gaskets, will have a marking on them that say top. There's not on these Victor Rines gaskets. I did just give my friend Paul Jeffries a quick call, and it is quite obvious on this one. There is no writing on this side at all, but on this side, which is the way it comes out the packet, it is it's marked Victor Rines. It probably doesn't make a great deal of difference, because usually the firings are very different on some cars, and the gasket material might be double-sided. It might have steel on one side and composite on the other, but this is composite both sides, and the things like the oil gallery holes are in the same place, whatever way around you put it. But we're going to go with the Victor Rines writing up. But yeah, if you're fitting your own gasket, just double check it, make sure. It should be written with top somewhere. Be careful with it going over the studs. It's a bit tight, this one. You don't want to damage it. Sometimes it might be better to screw the studs in after. And in fact, I'll just tweak, that's it. So before I lay it down, just to 100% sure there's nothing underneath that. And then just one final check, making sure all the holes and all the water and oil galleries are all lined up. Right, next bit, we're going to get the head. The head's been skimmed, so it's perfectly clean and flat anyway. We'll just give that a wipe over with brake cleaner, then we can just place the head on. And there's our head, just a final look before it goes on. This has been to MAR Motorsport, had a bit of an overhaul. It's had a light skim on it, it's been chemically cleaned. It's absolutely spotless now. I think it had new valve guides in it, all the valve seats recut, new unleaded valve seats so I can run unleaded fuel on it. And obviously it's looking like new actually. So the head's quite heavy, you want to be careful when you're putting it on, just not to damage the gasket. And as I say, we're just giving that a wipe over with brake cleaner to make sure it's chemically clean as well. And what I'm going to do, that is just about to drop down now. Just to make sure nothing's dropped down in there. That's our head on. Now we've got to get the head bolts on and torque it up correctly. Obviously first we got to put the push rods and the rocker gear back in. So the push rods just cleaned up and not very scientific really, just I've rolled them on a flat surface and you can usually see if one is bent or out of shape, it's pretty obvious. So we'll just clean each of these up, roll them on a flat surface, make sure it's flat, and then get all of them in. Worth mentioning as well, obviously we marked these push rods when they come out, so they went in a piece of card, so I know which rocker they line up with, so they go back in the same order. Obviously we've changed the followers, so it's a little less important now, but again, if there's any wear in this cup or anything, if you put them back in the same hole, then you don't get any problems. There's the piece of card we used. So yeah, they were just marked 1 to 8. Make sure they all go back in the same hole. Next, we are ready for the rocker gear. Now it should be clean anyway, but we just want to make sure, again, there's a mating surface here that the rocker gear tightens down to. And at this end, there's an oil gallery which feeds oil up into the rockers, into the rocker shaft. So I've already blown that out when the head was off, and that's been cleaned out, and it's the same on the rockers. So here are our rockers here. You can see the hole in the end there is the for the oil pressure to go up. Sorry, it's this end. Now I haven't done anything else to these rockers really, apart from just have a quick inspection, make sure they all rotate freely and they're not stuck. They all feel absolutely fine, and just a visual check to check for any wear, but they're looking pretty good. They haven't done many miles. That's it. Now one thing not to forget, there's a special washer which goes on here which holds this. There's a nut in place there. If you leave that out, it's not going to have any oil pressure in the rail. So there we go, it's like a lock-in tab. Now what I'm actually doing there is favouring the nuts which were originally inside the engine. So the nuts are inside the engine, don't have slight surface rust on them. Obviously the ones that are outside do. That's it. Now we just need to get these all torqued up now. Right, that's all the nuts on. They've all gone on finger tight. I haven't had to use any force to put them on, which is good. You want to make sure that the rockers are sitting back on the push rods, because when you tighten this down, obviously then they'll engage on the back and start pushing the valves down. So you want to make sure they're aligned and sitting in their seats. And we'll just go through the torquing process now. Right, next up we're just going to torque down the head. So make sure all those push rods are in the right place. And I've got here the tightening sequence. This is the tightening sequence for an MPI Mini, but it'll be the same for a 998. Ignore these torque settings. Go and check what the torque setting should be on the engine you're doing, because they do vary. But the tightening sequence doesn't really vary. I like the MPI one because the tightening sequence includes the rocker shaft bolts, whereas you look in some manuals and they don't, they'll just do the main head bolts. So it's a two-stage progressive tighten up of the head bolts. So I'm going to do that, but as I say, check what it says for the engine you're doing. Right, that's the first stage done. Now for the second stage. And there we go, all tight. The good thing about following a sequence is it torques it down progressively, so you haven't got to worry about it tightening down unevenly. And if you follow the numbers, you make sure you don't miss anything. Right, next job, before we go too much further, I'm going to do the valve clearances. Obviously it's had a new head gasket, it's been skimmed, so the valve clearances need doing. I'm not going to go into the detail of it. There is a video in my library video somewhere that shows adjusting the valve clearances when I've done them on PL in the past. So I'm going to use rule of 9, which in a nutshell means there's obviously 8 valves on the car. So if you basically turn the engine over until valve number 1 is fully open, and you adjust number 8, and then when valve 2 is fully open, you adjust valve number 7, and you just work through it like that. Should always add up to the number 9, and it's no problem. But I need to be able to turn the engine. Now this is throwing me a little bit because it's an automatic, so I'd usually just pop it in second gear. I'd jack one wheel up and either turn the wheel or rock the car backwards and forwards. I can't do that, so I did try getting a socket on the bottom pulley, and well, I can't get it on there with a ratchet, so I need a big spanner. Now, I'm not one to boast, but just check out the size of my tool. Look at that. That is a 34mm Halford's Advanced Special. I didn't buy it for this job, I bought it for another job years ago, steering rack I think. Just to put size into comparison, that's my smallest spanner, which is a 1/4 inch. So yeah, 34mm isn't the right size for the bottom pulley. It's a imperial size, but it's close enough to be able to turn the engine over with no plugs in, there's no compression. But yeah, this sorts the men out from the boys. Quite an impressive tool that, isn't it? Wouldn't you agree? Right, so we're getting on with putting everything back together. I thought I'd just mention this. So the thermostat, this is the old thermostat. I have tested this, so you can just put it in a glass. of a glass or a saucepan or something like that, pour boiling water in there, and you should see it slowly open with the heat of the boiling water. So on the bottom, it's got a temperature marked on it. This is an 88-degree thermostat. I've seen them right down to sort of 72 degree, and on minis, well, thermostats go right up 97, 98. In fact, some modern cars are over 100, they're 105, and that's just because the cooling system on modern vehicles works under pressure, and water boils at a higher temperature under pressure, so you can have a higher thermostat opening temperature. So thermostat's ready to go back in. As I say, I've tested that in boiling water. I can see it open. It's got this little bit at the bottom here. This is called a jiggle pin, and that actually allows, before the thermostat opens, it just allows a very, very small amount of water, and more importantly, if there's air in the system, to bleed itself out and bleed the system through. So not all thermostats have jiggle pins in, but they are quite useful, especially when you're first bleeding it up, because it just allows a very small amount of flow. Now, one thing, a common misconception is people that have got race engines and things like that, high performance, where they've got, especially if they've had overheating problems, they might take the thermostat out completely. That is actually a really bad idea, and can cause further overheating, especially localized overheating inside the engine. It sounds odd, but you need a restriction in there. The water needs to be in contact with the inner surfaces of the block and the head to be able to transfer the heat away from the metal into the water. And if the flow is too fast through the engine, that heat transfer can't happen, or it can't happen effectively, especially if you're running like a high capacity water pump with no thermostat in there. It can flow the water through the head too fast, and you can get localized overheating in the head. So you need some sort of restriction in there. If you look on somewhere like Mini Spares, they'll do an insert which goes in there, which just adds a restriction if you are going to remove the thermostat. So the purpose of the thermostat is to obviously regulate the temperature through the engine. If you're running a race car where you haven't got a heater inside and that sort of thing, and you're going to get it up to temperature, and you know everything's going to stay pretty constant, then they might run without a thermostat, but they will still have a flow restrictor in there. But for everyday use, yeah, don't take your thermostat out. The only time you might want to do something is if the thermostat has failed and you know you want to do a bit of a field fix. Rather than take it out and get rid of it, just take it out, cut the middle out the thermostat, so you're still left with this outer bit here with the inner bit clear. Cut the middle out the thermostat, take the gubbins out and put it back in. That still gives you a bit of a restriction to aid the heat transfer within the engine and restrict the amount of water flow, but obviously you'll be able to get by with it.